Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Paul Finch, Programme Director of World Architecture Festival, and one of its founders back in 2008. So this is our 16th year, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to Singapore for the 2023 edition. As many of you will know who've been to the festival before, it's the same basic format of awards presentations in all the crit rooms around this hall, overlaid with thematic conference content as well as things like building visits. We have to decide each year on a theme for the conference sessions that take place on this main stage. And last year, because of COVID, our theme was Together. We were in Lisbon, and it was the first time for 3 years, actually, that WAF had been able to stage this kind of reunion, if you like, of architects and designers. So having moved on from that, we were thinking about, well, what should we do in Singapore, this extraordinary location, which is an example of our theme this year, because our theme is Catalyst. And Catalyst, of course, is not necessarily a transformation of one thing to another. It may be an acceleration of something which is already happening, which then becomes more pronounced. It has greater energy. And in thinking about that, we thought it would be interesting to look at what are the drivers that inform the attitudes and the values of architects and designers, and then what are the drivers that result in particular approaches to particular projects and design challenges. And I think in a way, all the presentations in the crit rooms going on today and tomorrow, a lot of that will be concerned with why we did what we did. Was it client requirement? Was it the nature of the site? Was it the nature of a generic architectural challenge? Was it something that our practice has been exploring? Let's say the relationship between the man-made and the natural, or the drive towards low carbon design, or an interest in more sociological matters, in social equity, or in some cases it might be about the ethics and values of a project or a situation. And this choice of Catalyst was really building on some of the themes and ideas that we've seen emerging at WAF in recent years. I'm thinking, for example, of the desire, especially in post-colonial countries, of which Singapore is of course one, to pay far more attention to the history and culture of indigenous people, and sometimes the accompanying indigenous flora and fauna and nature of the place, which may have been overridden or half forgotten in a century or 2 centuries of colonialism or occupation, and that meshing of different cultures that inevitably occurs as a result. In thinking about how this might apply to Singapore, we're of course guided by the fact that this remarkable republic is a relatively young country. It only achieved independence as a former colonial adjunct in 1965. So the last year we were here, 2015, was the 50th anniversary of independence, and of course that helped to inform our theme that year. So the drivers here, to start with, were fairly simple. There was a desire to bring housing to the mass of the Singaporean people, most of whom lived in what we would probably think of today as a kind of version of squatter camps. There was a huge drive towards industrialised housing, and there were huge efforts to improve health and educational facilities of the population. And we saw in the initial planning drivers that the founders of modern Singapore, those drivers that they identified informed the program for this place, I think, for 50 years. Now, later on this morning, we're going to hear about how one might think of that in contemporary circumstances, because actually Singapore is now facing the problems of success rather than the problems of a relatively poor post-colonial new country. Our first presentation this morning, however, is an example of a different sorts of drivers. Charu Kakate from Moshe Safdie has been heavily involved with iconic projects that the practice has produced. Marina Bay Sands, of course, the Jewel out at the airport, which is transforming the way that we would think about the experience of travel. But in conversation with Charu before this event, she was making the point that there are clients or assumptions that, oh, well, design me an icon. Is that properly a driver? And I think, as you'll probably hear from her, well, not really, because the point is not, oh, I'll just go and design an icon, whatever that might mean. The real question is, what is the true program? How do you fulfill that to the best of your abilities? And if you're lucky, and if you're skillful, the outcome of the real drivers for the project may result in something which is memorable and, to use the I word, becomes a contemporary icon. I think by contrast, if you want to see what happens if you use kind of iconitis as your guiding light, you look at certain Gulf streets where you have a series of towers, each of which the architect has been asked to design an icon. They gave it their best shot, and you get a series of architectural exclamation marks. But of course, if you have a street which is full of exclamation marks, you don't notice them anymore. What you notice is the building that is not an exclamation mark, and it may be that quiet piece of quality design that ends up becoming the icon. Those were some of the thoughts that I had in conversation with Charu. And I'd now like to invite Charu Kakate to come to the stage to talk about her sort of architecture. Charu.